go.
Hey, welcome back to the show. This is John Steele. You're watching the Funnel Vision Podcast, episode 3. And in today's episode, we're going to be talking to Kyle Gollings. He is the Senior Vice President of Sales at Rep Data. Rep Data is a sample research and execution company founded in 2000. And they do a lot of work with quantitative data, quantitative research. They help companies source good quantitative data from across over 200 sources. And Kyle has been in sales in market research data for a while now. We worked together at a company called Polefish, and then he left to go to another company of this type, and he's with Rep Data now. So got a lot of experience in this area. But I really want to talk to him about sales technology. Sales technology has changed an awful lot. There's a survey, which I'll get into on the call today, that shows that salespeople have really moved away from CRM systems. The systems that are really at the center of companies. It started with sales, started with managing contact data, started with, managing the information that salespeople need to contact with their clients, connect with their clients, make meaningful connections, get to them at the right time, et cetera, to push deals forward. And it seems that CRMs have really gotten away from that and become a source of headache and busy work for salespeople. And salespeople, frankly, are using other tools to connect and to communicate. And the CRMs haven't really kept up. So I wanted to talk to Kyle about that survey and talk to him about how sales has changed over time, how running a sales team today is different from being just a salesperson, and sort of what the differences are and how technology can bridge that gap. So I'm really excited to get into this conversation with him. I think it'll be really interesting to talk about how AI has come to that. And we're going to get into that conversation. Kyle Gollings, welcome to the show.
Thanks, John. Happy to be here. Appreciate you having me.
All right. So I wanted to talk to you today because you've been in sales a long time. You've worked in sales on your own, and then you've also worked with sales teams. And sort of, I've seen over that time that sales technology has sort of changed. The approach to sales has sort of changed. And I wanted to talk through a little bit about those technological changes, sort of how you're sort of seeing that, sort of how you approach sales today versus in the past, and then sort of talk about some of the existing technology and why that may no longer serve salespeople. But first, I wanted to start with just the basics. So what does Rep Data do, and how do you sell it?
Yeah. So Rep Data is in the market research industry. We are a data collection and services provider. So our focus is providing access to human survey respondents, which is, it is weird to say human respondents, but with, AI and everything like that, that's an important distinction.
Mm-hmm.
And on top of that, we're really focused on data quality. So data quality has become an issue in our industry. There's rampant fraud and people trying to, kind of access and take surveys. So we have a lot of technology that's kind of built around our offering that prevents that fraud and gives a lot of insight and information to researchers to filter that out. So it's all about, high quality, easy access to data to inform decisions. So really making a frictionless process for our clients.
Mm-hmm. And what's the process like for selling that? I mean, do you find that you take a more traditional approach, or are you, sort of using technology to forward your connections a lot more often?
Yeah, we're certainly using technology, but I'd say it's somewhat of a traditional process. So it's still very much relationship driven. It's a lot of one-to-one communication. We still believe in in-person meetings and calls and kind of building that trust and relationship, over the long term. The market research industry is also, it's very kind of tight knit.
Mm.
So, there's a lot of relationships that, I have that span, decades, so there's people I've worked with, they've moved on to different companies. I've moved on, but we've kind of retained that relationship. So I think technology also enables those connections to stay intact, things like LinkedIn.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So, I know that a lot of salespeople, are willing to do cold calling, get on the phone, talk to a human being, those more direct one-to-one relationship building processes that I think a lot of millennials and certainly some Gen Z, would like rather die than get on a phone call. I know that could be challenging. I think a lot of technology we have these days is sort of seems designed almost exactly for that purpose. When I think about like ordering DoorDash or something like that, it's like I could call the restaurant, but I can just click a button and here it comes. So I don't have to talk to anybody. So if you're selling into, increasingly, millennials that may feel that way, are making purchase decisions. So if you're sort of, if sales technology and sales tactics are sort of around, those more direct connections, how do you keep making direct connections like that with people that are maybe not receptive to them?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's using, multiple modes, and really kind of seeing what fits. I mean, everything is much more personal, these days. So it's giving, it's kind of meeting them where they are. So whether it's, kind of sending LinkedIn messages, doing it that way, email still works, but, it's harder and harder to kind of break through the clutter of inboxes. I do think, virtual calls have kind of made it a little more comfortable. At least you're able to see someone's face, react to them through those nonverbal communications, as well. But yeah, the old school cold call, pick up the phone, dial for dollars,
Hmm.
break through, interrupt someone's day. Like that's harder than ever. I don't think anyone ever loved it
Hmm.
on either side, but, at some point in time, if you need to get a hold of someone, you might have to go that route. But the other thing too is text. I think text messaging, I think, has become much more acceptable,
Hmm.
as well, especially once you establish a relationship.
Right.
It's quick, it's easy. Once we also are working with clients, the other thing we use for technology integration is we'll create Slack channels,
Hmm.
with our clients. That then allows that immediacy. It's you can ask a quick question. It doesn't need to be a scheduled 30-minute call. Much more responsive. So that's another way too that we've used it.
Right. So yeah, so there still are sort of channels that feel more personal, may not be the phone, but it does feel like a more direct kind of one-to-one, even if it's not getting to somebody's secretary and
Right,
trying
right,
to get
right.
them on the phone like it used to be.
Exactly.
So the impetus for having you on, I think, came from this story that I had seen. So in 2021, Forbes released an article with the headline 48% of sales leaders say their CRM system doesn't meet their needs. And the good news is this is fixable. And then just in April in 2026, Bain Capital released, or Bain and Company released a report that shows that 70% of sales leaders now say that their CRM systems have inaccurate data, that it's led to missing growth goals, and it's causing problems within their company because of like data hygiene issues and things like that. So, why do you think these tools that were built for salespeople initially have really not kept up with the way sales is done and have sort of seen salespeople pulling away?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think in one case, some, especially the long, kind of tenured platforms, they haven't changed much over the years. They look the same today as they did when I first started using them in,
Hmm.
the early 2000s. I think they're also, especially the big ones, like they're designed for so many different kind of sales functions and organizations that it's like they're designed to solve for everybody, but then really doesn't deliver promises to, those anyone really. It's almost too big, too broad
Hmm.
that you can literally do anything with it, but it takes so much work to personalize it and customize it for your business that I
Hmm.
think you just, you're probably only using a fraction of the percent of like what it really is, it can do.
Right.
I think the other side you talk about is like the data hygiene side. I'd say any sales organization I've been in, it's heavily reliant on manual data entry from a salesperson, which salespeople are the worst admin people out there. I'd say I think that's a pretty, I don't think that's a shocking statement. So when you're putting that responsibility, into the hands of salespeople, I don't think it should be surprising that then the results aren't great.
Hmm.
I think there needs to be, kind of probably a more systematic way in which the data is, populated consistently, refreshed, kind of, cleaned over time. Any company I've been at, they struggle with duplication. There's always duplicate accounts, duplicate contacts.
Hmm.
If you're not the owner of that account, it may be impossible to make a change.
Hmm.
So then you have to run back to a system administrator. And once you start doing that, you just give up.
Yeah, folks in some of these surveys have referenced side systems, side, like I have my own Google Doc that I use and maintain, or I've got shadow data files that never make it into the CRM. And, they sort of use the tools that benefit them.
Yeah.
Do you think CRMs have a problem with, providing the benefit of this data to salespeople?
Yeah, I think that's one of the big issues is that it can be, not always, but at least it's often helpful in providing information upwards with an organization. So,
Hmm.
when I've led sales teams, it is helpful for me to get, data across the whole team. I can see activity if it's entered properly, pipeline, conversion, revenue against target, all that type of stuff. It's not always helpful the other way. So, the if the individual salesperson is getting value from the time and the energy it takes to put the data in, then they're more likely to do it. One thing I've done in the past is I've always created some different kind of tasks or, kind of regular, kind of activities for the team that require data from the CRM that would then
Hmm.
make it easier for them to, kind of fulfill. So an example of that is, we would do kind of like a weekly activity roundup,
Hmm.
across the team. And my big thing was, I don't need you to just list out what meetings you have. I already know that. I already have that. But what I do want is I want the context. I want tell me something I'm not going to see in the CRM.
Hmm.
But for a starting, if they didn't enter that information come the end of the week, it's going to be a bear for them to go back and figure out who did I meet with. They're going to literally have to open up their calendar, start looking through it. The CRM can kind of help them. So I would give them some sort of task
Hmm.
that kind of encouraged the data entry to then make their life easier on the other side. But even now with AI, like even something like that is becoming antiquated, because there's better ways to do it.
Yeah, so let's talk about some of those better ways. So, what are some tools that you've seen sort of come out that you think have sort of changed the game for people, or you're sort of there was some relief when you saw the feature set? Like, okay, here we go. This is sort of fits with the way we do business, and it'll sort of either it really helps me get my workflow better, or like it'll get the company off my back about the data stuff. Whichever you prefer there.
Yeah, what I love is a lot of the AI notation tools. So, the ability to not just record a meeting, but, also to then get, insights, an AI summary, clearly defined next steps, and a record that a salesperson can look back on. I've explained myself as I'm an active listener. I need to
Hmm.
be, fully engaged with the conversation. Once I start taking notes, I'm lost. So I have a pen here, but I don't know why I'm not going to use it. So, the ability to kind of, have all that, information, captured, but I'm still allowed to be attentive, present, and listening as well as, kind of communicating, with my clients is important. So I think something like that has a direct benefit to the individual salesperson.
Mm.
They don't have to have extensive notes. They don't have, notebooks that they lose. And then organizationally, once you have a whole organization using these tools, you're then able to get some knowledge sharing going on. You're
Mm.
able to have people seeing, well, what's resonating? Where are the barriers? If you're rolling out a new product, how are prospects reacting? What do they like? What do they dislike? As a sales leader, you can also see, is my team presenting our latest capability? Are we using the right pitch? Are we using the brand name? All those things are going to be, measured at scale and with ease. It's a great training mechanism as well. I'm currently, in a new role. So I'm just starting out a new organization. I need to learn the pitch. I need to learn the vernacular that everyone uses. The traditional way is, I'd literally have to get people to invite me to their sales calls and be just,
Mhm.
the guy in the corner listening in, shadowing people. Now I don't have to do that. Now I can, on my schedule without interrupting anyone else, I can go back and look at those calls. I can do queries. I can see how does CPG agencies react compared to market research companies and kind of do those comparisons, on the fly. And, even go a step further with platforms like Gong, for example, is one that we use. We can then tie that right into developing a sales strategy, battle cards, email content, you name it. We can leverage all of that from this, massive depository of conversations.
Okay, so yeah, you mentioned platforms there that sort of act as a layer to where they'll sort of help you record calls, videos, video calls, things like that to sort of ingest all of that data, maybe structure it for you, maybe surface, give you some of those benefits to the individual salespeople that you might not otherwise have. There's a name that the consultants have come up with for that. as you know, I'm doing some consulting now, so I keep up with these consultants a little bit. And I mentioned Bain earlier. One of their competitors, Boston Consulting Group, coined this term bionic selling for the companies and technologies that support them that sort of are looking to do just that, where they basically divorce the act of a salesperson's workflow from that data layer and sort of find ways to get around that, usually with some sort of AI component tied to it. And so I'm curious, are you using AI platforms yourself, or are you using AI that's sort of baked into some of these tools that you guys are using?
Yeah, I'm doing both. So I'm definitely using AI, on my own. So using, Claude and Gemini and those things. I'm still like, I think we all are still kind of, early days with it all, but I've used it for, meeting prep. I've used it to develop sales strategies and business development plans. Big thing I've done is, try to identify prospective clients that I've never heard of before, like disruptor brands or things like that. Like we all know P&G buys a lot of research, but everyone's knocking on P&G's door. So how do I find, other, kind of less competitive areas of opportunity? And AI helps me uncover that. It's also then can tie right into, developing some of the communication that I'll put together. I always use it as a blueprint. I never just copy and paste. I always, kind of make some modifications and make sure it's my own voice. But it ensures that you're not starting from just a blank page. And also, like, when I've been doing this for so long, selling a very similar product for so long, I mean, honestly, like, I bore myself sometimes with what I write. So it's like I need something fresh and a different perspective, and that usually like breaks my writer's block, if you will.
Yeah, yeah, that's an interesting take on it. So I'm curious about the sort of the anxiety around AI that a lot of people seem to have. So we mentioned before, sales is much more of a one-to-one sort of direct networking, and sort of much more human, by design. You want humans interacting with each other, sort of reacting to each other's needs, that kind of a thing. It's of the business practices out there, it's a very human sort of practice. So I'm curious if the AI anxiety is similar among salespeople, or if you guys are a little bit more insulated from it, because it can be so person to person driven. You can sort of use your own human qualities to sort of further it. And maybe that's something that AI can't really compete with. Do you think
Yeah.
you think salespeople feel less anxiety, I guess would be my question, around this stuff, or is it the same?
My hunch is less anxiety. I think for the reasons you said, that, there is a personal aspect to it. But I think that, there are a lot of salespeople that have moved away from some of those, kind of human interactions, less business travel, less face to face, all that stuff. So I've always done this, and here at Rep Data, we do it, is we're very much about, spending time with our clients.
Mm-hmm.
That's, I think, how you protect against that, kind of, AI takeover of sales.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, at least now I don't know how AI would take a client to a lunch. Maybe that'll happen sometime, but
Yeah. Trade shows,
that
conferences. How are they going to
right,
do that?
right, right. And frankly, that's oftentimes one of the more enjoyable parts of sales. Is being able to, know your clients as not just clients, but as people. And really get to know them, and that's where that relationships gets built, and that's how you have it, kind of last, over time, and across, different organizations. So to me, that's the fun part. I think that I think because salespeople don't want to be bothered with a lot of the admin, whenever AI can take over that admin, we're like, great, do it. Like, we didn't want to do it in the first place. We weren't doing it in the first place. So,
Right.
like, you're
Right.
not taking our job. You're doing the thing we were ignoring anyway.
Right.
So I think some of the bad habits of salespeople, can get covered, and filled by some AI solutions, and salespeople would be receptive to that.
You mentioned earlier that, a part of Rep Data's role is to figure out if people are real. And that part of your job as a salesperson even is to prove to someone that you're a real person, that you're not some bot just spewing out messages to them on some timeline or something like that, and making that feel real. Obviously there's this huge authenticity deficit online, where nobody seems to know what's real or who's real or anything, especially since AI's sort of come in, but even sort of before that. And I think like there's a broader thing there with sort of the way we're sort of fit with parasocial relationships. We get connected with like creators and things that they think we'll like. And then we sort of, are connected with people online, but they're not necessarily real like connections. They're not necessarily real. We don't ever see them in real life. I mean, there are a lot of people that I feel like I know online, but that I've never met them in person. Do you find that people are maybe more receptive to a traditional sales approach because of this? Do you think that might have anything to do with it? Have you seen any evidence of that people now are maybe more receptive to meeting you in person, meeting you for lunch or something, than maybe they were before?
Yeah. And I think COVID kind of had a whole role to play here too.
Mm-hmm.
We all went into that kind of lockdown period, and even when we came out of it, there was still that reluctance to, I think, get back face to face, not because of like fear of illness or anything. I think just complacency. You were comfortable, you were, at home, you're in your, sweatpants, whatever it might be. But then you've had that disconnect feeling. And I think that, my sales team was one of, I think, an early to really kind of like be a little bit forceful on that of like, hey,
Mm-hmm.
like, let's meet at a coffee shop. Let's have lunch. Even if you're not going into the office and I'm not in an office, we can still find, a mutual spot to get together. And, now with, return to work, happening, offices coming, kind of back and full, or even companies that are mandating, a return to an office. Well, now they're almost welcome saying, all right, well, if they're in the office, I might as well have a purpose to be there. And if you're coming into the office, like you help validate that for me. And it doesn't hurt if you bring lunch along as well. But,
Yeah.
like that's, so I think there is that receptiveness to it. And I think, you do get tired of looking at a screen too, even as good as video calls can be.
Yeah.
It's nice to see someone in 3D.
Yeah, that fatigue is real. So you mentioned, these platforms being able to record calls and have this data synthesis that AI can contribute to. But I'm curious about the data that you are using and sort of what becomes important and what's sort of for someone else. So, you want AI to surface like things that are valuable to you. Has it changed at all? Like what you need to prepare for a call, the type of data, the type of information you need, this a must have versus sort of nice to have, or even maybe just overkill for what you need it for? Has that sort of changed? Do you feel like you need more data or less now? Like what are you trying to do before a call that you sort of need?
Yeah. I mean, I have seen with AI that it becomes a little bit overkill sometimes. If you,
Mm-hmm.
put in certain prompts, they'll give you the entire history of, PepsiCo. I don't need that,
Right.
going in to see if we field a survey or not. So I think it's, probably like just doing training, even myself, on what those prompts are. How do you get it to be focused on the purpose of the meeting? I think that, still what I see in a lot of the CRMs is that the prompts are somewhat generic, still, it's just, I log an activity. So it's going to then populate a follow-up email, or, you know, I just booked a meeting with a new client and the CRM wants me to send a reminder for that meeting right away. If I just follow that instruction, my client would think I like lost my mind. It's like, we just booked it. Why are you reminding me about it? So
Right.
there's,
Right.
the automation is there. The intelligence isn't always there. So there's a lot of things that I'm just muting and ignoring because it's not relevant to the situation. So maybe that's a setup thing, maybe it's, advanced, AI along the lines that'll get smarter and better at that. But
Mm-hmm.
there's still quite a few things that, it's just, you just ignore. And you'll probably look at anyone's CRM and see a bunch of past due tasks that just didn't mean anything in the first place. That's why they never were acted on.
Right. Right. Yeah. It must be, since sales is so results focused, it must be pretty easy at times to just be like, yeah, I mean, that's not necessary because I'm getting the results without it. So why change up? Right. That's so interesting. And it goes back to what you were saying about not seeing the direct impact of everything that the CRM is having you do. So then, for your personal sort of workflow, it may not make a lot of sense. And I think that's where, we sort of need to think about modifying these tools. So, I got to ask, like, if you were going to sort of start to design a new kind of CRM for 2026 that could actually appeal to salespeople, re-engage some of them, bring them back, where would you start? Like, what kind of features would you focus on? What kind of sort of motion? What do you think in these platforms is really necessary that sort of hasn't been maybe done yet, or needs to be incorporated in a better way? How would you start on a project like that?
Yeah, I mean, I in my professional life, I live within LinkedIn.
Mm-hmm.
I'm in there nonstop all day long. So to me, it's like some way to have better integration. To me, like LinkedIn is the best, like, B2B database out there, but nothing really, I haven't seen anything that ties into it to then, keep your CRM, updated when someone changed jobs or anything like that. So there's always a big disconnect between what I use the most, versus where all of my data is stored. And, that's Microsoft owned. So understandable that, they're not going to be fully integrated with, every tool out there. But, for me, that's where I'd like to see I'm doing my work really outside the CRM. And then I have to take what's done outside and put it in. So some seamless way for me to, kind of get that data entered without me, even today, I'm still typing in someone's name into a field
Mm-hmm.
because certain integrations don't work the way they're supposed to work. And I think the other is, I think more automation around, data hygiene. I feel like any CRM I know, you have to go buy something else or hire someone else to, go and do a data cleanse or whatever it might be.
Mm-hmm.
None of it seems to be happening dynamically, and automatically. Like there should be a way that it sees that this account's been entered 3 different times. It's the same account. We're merging it, those things don't seem to be there. And then I think just like proactivity, like that it's prompting you with a suggestion, this, and again, this could be just how it's set up, but this account hasn't been touched in 3 days or 30 days or whatever it might be, or you haven't updated, any data, on these 4 accounts, in the last quarter. That way it's bringing stuff to your attention because there's just, you become overwhelmed with, what's in there and you
Mm-hmm.
kind of can't, see the forest through the trees, if you will.
Sure, sure. So I ask this question to every guest that we have on, and I think it's a way of sort of understanding your workflow and sort of how they might be able to, build something similar to themselves. I really hope people tune into this stuff, as far as our newsletter is concerned, as far as these videos are concerned, and trying to build things that can improve their productivity. So I always ask all of our guests, tell us one workflow, automation, integration, or tool that you can't live without, or that's really, improving your workflow day to day.
Yeah, that's a good one. I'm gonna have to go with what I just said. LinkedIn Sales Navigator. If I go way back, I think I already mentioned it, but like, way back in my career, like LinkedIn didn't exist.
Yeah.
And, you had, a Rolodex. I mean, I'll give a visual. I still have stacks of business cards for whatever reason.
Mm-hmm.
But, if LinkedIn went away, I'd probably quit sales. I'd probably go into some other profession.
Yeah.
Because I just live in there. It's the best
Yeah.
way to find, the right people that I want to talk to. I still get really good response from, communicating through the platform. It's how you and I reconnected.
Yeah. That's right.
So, it's, I may be old school, but it's also the only like so-called social media platform that I'm on. I'm
Mm.
not on Instagram. I'm not on Facebook. So I live and die by LinkedIn.
Does Sales Navigator sort of have it siphoned off to where it's only showing you like the contacts that you want to like that are connected to you, or do you have sort of everything mixed in? I know a lot of people, myself included, have a ton of people in LinkedIn that they just accepted a connection from someone that's maybe prospecting or something like that. How do you keep it trimmed up in LinkedIn to make it a good contributor to a sales function?
Well, I don't have it trimmed up. I have over 10,000 connections. So I am like guilty of that. But what I find helpful of Navigator specifically is that
Mhm.
it gives me the full view of an organization. Whereas other databases or like Zoom Info, for example, it's only ever going to give you a partial view. You're not seeing everyone that works there. So, you're kind of blinded. So I like to be able to see everyone in an organization, really do pinpoint searches to find exactly who is, the people I want to get in touch with. And then I can do filtering. I can then see who's a first degree, second degree connection,
Mhm.
what mutual connections might we have. And that just gets back to that personalization, relationship building, kind of that sales approach that I think provides that authenticity of,
Mm.
you're a real person. So any place I've been, that's if the company didn't have navigators, the first thing I purchase and kind of integrate into the sales stack.
Absolutely. Just one final thing on that. So you mentioned, LinkedIn is really the best database out there, and sort of needing to have the CRM sort of be better at enriching data. Obviously, LinkedIn is very protective of their API. They sort of have really strict rules around scraping and things like that. You can violate their terms of service really easily. Have you seen any tools that sort of bridge that gap for salespeople? I know Apollo has tried to pull in LinkedIn as data as much as possible. Clay is one that I hear talked about a lot. Are those tools that, like data enrichment tools, that sort of can bridge that gap for you using LinkedIn?
I've used a bunch. The one that I do like is called Seamless. I think it's seamless.io, I believe.
Hmm.
And it's not scraping off LinkedIn, but what it's doing is it allows you to identify the person and then match it up with, relevant contact info. And then with one more click, I can then get that person entered into the CRM. So then that provides consistency in data entry, and it provides ease of flow for the salesperson. So they don't have to type. They can, they don't have to touch their keyboard, and they can get a contact entered.
Well, Kyle Gollins, thank you for joining me today. I really appreciate it. This is a really helpful conversation, and I hope all of our viewers, enjoy checking out some of these new sales tools and maybe trying them for themselves. And if you can write in and tell us about any of the experiments that you're running or any of the things that you've tried, that would be really helpful. Kyle, thanks again for coming.
Yeah. Thanks, John. Appreciate it.
Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye.